If everyone could just be silent for a moment. Loving God, we want to give thanks for your vision of the kingdom of God. Vision of a kingdom for which all of us are striving. Give thanks for your church and for all who are gathered here today, especially for the many communities of faith that are represented. And help us to keep your vision before us always. Thankfully, I will not sing these two verses, but I will say these two verses of Be Thou My Vision. Be Thou my vision, O Lord of my heart, not be all else to me, save that Thou art. Thou my best thought by day or by night, waking or sleeping, Thy presence my light. Riches I heed not, nor man's empty praise. Thou mine inheritance, now and always. Thou and Thou only, first in my heart, High King of heaven, my treasure.
Miguel, you probably heard that people are having problems hearing you, so if you could either speak up or increase the volume of your mic.
Thank you. I will do that. Thank you for letting me know that the mic is low. I will try to speak up as much as I can. So today we're going to be talking about, we have 5 sections, so there's actually a lot of material to cover. There will be some brief moments to pause and ask questions. We're going to speak first about what we mean by the word vision. We're going to try to define mission and vision. We're going to talk about the difference between strategic thinking and strategic planning. One of the points that we make is that it's important to name goals, but to spend a lot more time creating strategies to arrive at those goals, and we need to create mechanisms for evaluating strategies. We're going to talk about the big question, and then end with a discussion about potential next steps. So how will we implement some of these ideas? So the first and most basic, I think, idea here has to do with what we mean by the term mission and vision. And you may know that right now both words are being used in a wide variety of ways, so I want to clarify what ECF means when we're using those terms. Mission, we understand as what it is that God has called us to do. We take a page from the work of Peter Drucker in that we say mission is a simple operational description of what it is that we do. Because we're a church, we believe more precisely that it's not just what we do, but what God has called us to do. Many congregations have mission statements. We think that the mission statements are important. It's actually, though, more important to have ongoing mission conversations. So if you end up with a less than formal sort of list of things that are priorities for your community, like the one that we show on the screen, that's great. It's really the most important thing is to have an ongoing conversation about what is it that we as a community of faith do. Mission is closely related to vision, in so much as vision is a hopeful picture of the future that describes what the church or world will look like when your mission has been accomplished. So vision and mission are very closely related. Again, vision is a hopeful picture of what the church and world will look like once your mission has been accomplished. Interestingly, sometimes congregations are much more clear about their vision than their mission, and they need to work a little bit backwards. I think the most important think that's fine. I think the most important thing is that the two are related. What you're doing should be leading to that hopeful picture. The only other point I would want to make about mission and vision is that it's a really important tool. It's an important tool and resource in leading change. A clear, hopeful vision is oftentimes a rallying cry for a community. It's the thing that people point to, and it's what helps to organize the wonderful herd of cats that is a congregation around a shared sense of purpose. So use this tool wisely.
As Miguel said, we often, use mission and vision interchangeably, and we think it's important for you to at least know where we're coming from when we talk about mission and vision. But apart from formal statements about mission and vision, the process of kind of discerning both as a community, as individuals, is very critical to this process. And as we go through this process, we want to emphasize the fact that this is a community process. It's not, often we will ask kind of the leader or the rector or the potential rector, what is your vision for this congregation? And I think the role of leaders is not to necessarily articulate a vision, but to maybe throw some ideas and thoughts and engage the wider community in the process of a shared vision, a shared development of what God is calling you to do and what actually you're doing in your own unique context. Now I want to move kind of to the whole issue of strategic thinking versus strategic planning. And you've all been probably involved in strategic planning exercises either in your congregation or in your place of business or in other organizations. And quite frankly, the traditional concept of strategic planning, I think, is somewhat anachronistic because it's premised on the fact that you go through a process of 6 to 9 months of coming up with this strategic plan, and then somehow you're expected to come up with goals and objectives, and then you're expected to kind of accomplish that over a period of 3 to 5 years. The problem with that is in this day and age, whether you're a congregation or a church or an organization or a major corporation, the idea of engaging in the separate process of planning and then the separate process of implementation is just not realistic anymore. Contemporary society basically dictates and requires an ongoing process of planning, implementing, rather than trying to divide these tasks into separate and discrete time periods. The problem with strategic plans, traditional strategic plans, is that they mistake goals for strategies. And we'll talk about the difference in a minute. The other thing is that you are often very, very ambitious in your strategic plans, and often you'll have congregational strategic plans that will say we want to double our membership in the next 3 years. We want to grow our endowment from 0 to $1 million. We want to build a new education wing to our facilities. We want significant outreach programs in the neighborhood. And while those may be laudable goals, often people get overwhelmed or discouraged, and as you know, a lot of strategic plans wind up on the shelf. The other thing is that we expect our strategies to fit into rigid time frames, and I think we all know from our own personal lives and our personal ministries that's not very realistic. And also the other issue is that it's often very difficult in this day and age to predict where we are going to be as individuals and communities 3 to 5 years from now. So rather than a formal strategic planning process, what we are advocating is strategic thinking. And strategic thinking, much like mission type of conversation, is an ongoing process of involving the leadership of the congregation and the whole community into this iterative, ongoing process of constantly looking at who you are, where you're going, and how to get there. About strategic thinking is to look at what is a strategy. Strategy is something your goals rather than goals. The goal to double our membership next year may be a goal, but it would be how do we people in the life of our local community. The other thing about strategies is that strategies need to be evaluated on in light of your financial capacity, in light of your uniqueness, and other things we'll talk about in a minute. Also, we're going to talk about which is in the elephant in the room, which is also an opportunity to look at mission in kind of a very and kind of a future way, but in a very practical, iterative way. So the idea is that what we recommend is that the leadership body, usually the vestry, at each of your meetings, you should tackle a strategic issue, a mission-related issue that really engages the leadership into some big picture thinking, but in a very kind of practical, down-to-earth way. And we'll give you some examples in a minute. So strategies are responses to real-time challenges. And we use the real-time, meaning that rather than engaging in a separate time period of planning and a separate time period of implementing, real-time means that you confront challenges and opportunities on an ongoing basis, especially the leadership of the congregation. And these challenges or opportunities fall into 3 categories. Organizational challenges. How can we gain a stronger sense of shared mission? How do we engage people in the pews or our constituents into this process? What makes us unique from all the other churches in the area? In the secular world, that's often described as a competitive advantage, but when you're kind of looking at, when you engage in the process of visioning or mission discussions, your uniqueness is really critical because congregations have a unique role in their own context, in their own location. Programmatic challenges. Programs would be individual ministries. How can our programs or our ministries make a stronger impact on the lives of people in our congregation and empower them to engage in God's mission in the world? What kinds of initiatives, even on a pilot basis, may address a growing problem or growing need or growing perception in our neighborhood? And operational challenges and opportunities. How do we fund our ministries over the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 years? How do we enhance our stewardship? How do we engage in more creative fundraising? And or how do we develop a website or a communication strategy that will move us into the future? So what I suggest is that you look at organizational challenges and opportunities, programmatic challenges and opportunities, and operational challenges and opportunities. And maybe at each vestry meeting, you frame a question and you engage in a strategic, a mission-based conversation without necessarily solving the issue, but starting to raise some potential strategies for addressing these questions, challenges, and opportunities. Let's pause for a moment. Are there any questions or comments about this whole idea of mission, vision, and the difference between strategic thinking and having a formal strategic? And you can either use the chat room or, Miguel, maybe we can kind of let people also talk if it doesn't cause too much feedback or interference.
I can.
I know we have a couple people typing right now. There's an old adage that plans are useless, planning is essential. So the idea is not to stop the process of planning, but don't necessarily get bogged down by kind of putting it in a neat bow and call it a strategic plan that just overwhelms and confuses people. Okay, Marjorie has a question. How can you assure people who get anxious that the process will yield good results? One of the roles of leadership is to be a non-anxious presence. I think one way of doing that is to assure people that it's not about the end results. It's about the ongoing process of discernment. And obviously, you want to discern, practical and realistic strategies for addressing issues. But part of it is if you engage the community, if you preach and teach about the need to be responsive to God's call, to discern your own gifts, I think the anxiety goes away. Maybe we need to mute because I think we're getting some feedback.
You have been muted.
Just 1 second, Donald.
Your microphone has been turned on.
Scripture references, I think there are a lot of scripture references. I think when you look at a lot of Jesus' teaching, a lot of his instructions to his apostles, and I think a lot of Acts of the Apostles, quite frankly, is very much about the early church fathers and mothers engaging in a process of how do we go about preaching this thing called the gospel of Jesus to originally the Jewish community and then the wider world. And some of it is even like conversations about the early apostles had about whether or not Gentile converts needed to be circumcised to be part of the community. These were broad-based strategic conversations that these original leaders of the church had. Just the changing needs of the world and how to take this thing called the gospel and bring it to so help you find specific paths, but I think Jesus, which was all about empowering leaders, he was no longer and the early way the church dealt with challenges and opportunities from the Gentile world to persecution are very vivid and kind of very poignant ways of engaging in ongoing strategic and mission-filled conversations. Is that helpful?
Another, another scripture reference which we've used before is the description of sending the apostles out 2 by 2 without a major 3 to 5 year plan, but instead with just faith as well as a few items, and really helping people to really trust on that. So.
A couple interesting questions. One from Roger. How do you get the conversations from slipping from strategic to problem solving, and how would the dynamics change if you're doing this on a diocesan regional level? I think part of it is how you frame the conversation. And we're going to talk about the big question, which I think is one way of keeping people focused on strategies rather than problem solving. We'll get back to that. And the dynamics are similar on a diocesan or regional level. In fact, we have a program called Strategic Solutions, where we actually work with diocesan leadership on this whole process of visioning and engaging in strategic conversations. And I know somebody is online from the Diocese of Nevada. Miguel and I were just in Las Vegas a couple weekends ago working with the Standing Committee to look at this whole role of what is the role of the Standing Committee as the diocesan leadership in helping congregations engage in a broader mission and vision for what it means to be the body of Christ, known as the Diocese of Nevada. And it was a very dynamic, a very provocative, and I think a real good first step in starting to get something like a standing committee, which often sees itself as a regulatory body, move from that role to a much more dynamic role as being the missional and strategic leaders of the diocese in empowering congregations in this wider idea of God's mission in the world.
So I want to go back actually to Roger's question, which framed this nicely, which is inevitably if you start asking folks to consider a strategic question, people will start doing some problem solving. Some people will start coming up with potential strategies for addressing that challenge, and that can be a very exciting conversation. So the example we want to just consider, want you to consider, is a challenge that is taking place in many congregations, which has to do with funding. You know, one common challenge might be how can we get funding for our ministries over the next 10 years. If you were to open a vestry meeting with that, prayerfully open it, there will be some really great ideas, and there will also be not as great ideas. To collectively do something and get those all at the table. The crux of the question that we this next third of the presentation on is what criteria will your congregation use to lift out the best idea of the group? How will, after a brainstorming session, or strategic conversation and brainstorming session, how will you as a group think together about which one or two to realistically pursue?
The other problem with kind of problem solving, and especially, I mean, we do this very well in the church, especially the Episcopal Church. You know, someone will say, "Oh, we tried that 10 years ago and it didn't work." And not that brainstorming is not an effective tool for people to kind of generate conversations. But the critical key is how do you move brainstorming to actually devising strategies for addressing some of these challenges and opportunities. Now, the whole idea of a strategy filter is something that we did internally in our organization, and quite frankly, it was in response to you know, my going out and talking to bishops and congregations and leaders and coming back and say, "Oh, I have a great idea. The Diocese of East Oshkosh would really like us to do X. Let's start a program." Now, early on, staff was very gracious and said, "Okay, Donald, we'll try to do something." But finally, when we started engaging in this ongoing process of strategic thinking, we finally realized that we can't be all things to all people. We feel that we're a wonderful resource to the church, but we do have limited resources. We do have limited staff. And we really needed to focus on those programs that we felt we can have the most impact on helping local faith communities grow, thrive, and be faithful witnesses in their own context. So when you're looking at, a strategy, and let's say that the question before you is, how can we be a more effective presence in our changing neighborhood? And whether the neighborhood is an inner city neighborhood or a rural congregation, it's really important that congregations have this conversation about what is the role of this community in this time and place. Often the question you'll be asked by people is, what difference would it make if St. John's was no longer in existence? And, you can say, well, we are going to open up a day school, or we are going to, build a major youth complex. And, you come up with all these wonderful ideas that may be much beyond the scope of your resources or the scope of your capacity. And then you kind of hone it down. And how do you hone it down? And these are some examples, if you can go back to the back slide, I'm sorry. So some of the things you might want to look at in a strategy filter. And a strategy filter is just a way of evaluating possible ideas for addressing these issues. Does it support our mission and vision? If our mission is to be a worshiping community that engages people in this neighborhood and invites them to be disciples and active and faithful witnesses, does this particular strategy you're thinking about meet that? Is this unique, or does it duplicate other people's work? If there are 5 congregations of whatever denomination in your own particular locality, are you duplicating what someone else is doing effectively? And is that something you really want to be spending limited resources on? Is it financially sustainable through fees or gifts or stewardship or government grants? You may come up with a wonderful strategy for addressing something, and you can't sustain it beyond the first year, and that's not something you want to get in. Is it consistent with our identity? If your identity is basically, for example, if you're located in a community of elderly folk with very few young families, somewhat geographically isolated, does it really make sense that you're going to get involved in major youth work if that neighborhood or that community can't support that, or that's not the demographic you're currently serving in? And the last one, do you have the internal capacity to begin and sustain the initiative? Now, this is when you have these wonderful brainstormed ideas on your piece of paper. This is when you hone it down to those 2 or 3 strategies that are really going to move you forward. So if you go to the next slide. So key terms in a strategy filter, you go back to your mission and vision. You go back to your uniqueness. How are you unique than other Episcopal congregations, other Christian communities, other social service agencies in your own community? Financial sustainability, your identity as a congregation, and your internal capacity. Any questions or comments about this idea of evaluating strategies and how you move from kind of brainstorming to this much more reflective, thoughtful process of honing it down? And people are typing some questions. Because another thing I think you also have to realize is that it's not only what you're going to do, it's what you're not going to do. I guess internal capacity would mean, do you have the people power? Do you have the financial resources? Do you have the leadership? Do you have the passion for doing it? I often have an adage here at ECF. I'll say, if it's not fun, it's not worth doing. And what I really mean is that if we're not passionate about what we feel we are being called to do, we're not going to be successful at it because, first of all, we're not going to have the enthusiasm, the excitement, the energy to move it forward. So internal capacity is, people power, energy, excitement, financial resources, the building space, the volunteers you need. It's all that. In a congregation, is there a point where critical mass to move forward is lost? And I guess what you're saying, Gwen, do you get to the point where your numbers dwindle to the point where there's kind of nothing you can do? I don't think so. I think even if you have a congregation of 15, and we work with dioceses in rural places where the average Sunday attendance is fewer than 10. I think this where it really becomes critical that you kind of hone your strategies. And it may be that you have a congregation of 15 people in basically a community with a lot of elderly or shut-ins, and what you decide to do based on your mission and vision and capacity is to call on 3 or 4 shut-ins a week and bring them a little goodie bag or a meal, and just to make sure that they're plugged into medical services, social services. Or you call 5 or 6 people a week, and that is your unique contribution in your own context and your own vision. I think if you get to the point where your only role is of the congregation is to be kind of hospice care to members of the congregation, that's a whole nother conversation. But I think whether you're 3 or 300, as long as you are reaching out beyond your walls and being about God's mission in the world, the dwindling numbers does not make a difference. But what you do and how you do it is the critical conversation. Aspirational goals. Okay, we're going to talk about the big question in a minute. There's always a balance between being practical and being aspirational, and I believe in aspirational goals, but even aspirational goals have to be constantly evaluated through ongoing mission conversations and ongoing strategy conversations, because strategies are ways of accomplishing your mission. And what Pamela's saying is, children's programs. Now, and I'm glad they're going well, but it may be that the children's programs you have now may need to be tweaked. They may need to be expanded. They may need to be, scaled back a bit. They may need to be, done in a different way. The issue is, if you're engaging in these ongoing conversations and strategy evaluation, aspirational goals continue to be relevant and scalable. Anybody else before we move on to the big question? So you have, okay, so kind of to do a quick review, we talked about kind of the mission, and whether it's a mission statement or mission conversations about, what is God calling us to do, and what are we actually doing? And it may be, we gather for worship, we support and inspire our members, and we connect with our immediate neighborhood, the community, and the world. And then the vision is, if we live into our mission, our vision is that our members are going to be empowered, faithful disciples and make a difference in their local community. So you have these mission conversations. You articulate a vision that inspires and empowers people. And maybe part of the vision, like Pamela's talking about, is we want to provide programs for children so that families could be nourished and children could hear and proclaim and live out the good news of the gospel. And then that's not a static process. And the way you keep mission and vision alive and relevant is by ongoing mission-based conversations and then ongoing strategic conversations. So let's say you come up with this program, children's programs that attract families, support them, and nurture them. And then you have strategy screens or opportunities to continue to evaluate those strategies to make sure they're still relevant and still sustainable and still making an impact. But then we introduced this new concept of the big question. And the big question is the elephant in the room, or it's an opportunity or threat to which the organization, and in your case, congregations, must respond. And it's usually beyond the scope of your current strategies, requiring a new approach. So why engage in this idea of a big question? First of all, it's a very creative, dynamic way for the congregation or the faith community or the organization kind of to move out of your comfort zone and to start looking at what is really the challenge or opportunity that we're either not addressing, we're not addressing adequately, we refuse to address, or we're afraid to address. So let's move on to some possible big questions. Our building demands a disproportionate amount of our resources. How do we move from a focus on building maintenance to mission? Now, the reason why that is a big question is that before you kind of articulate it in that way, you're dealing with, the roof needs fixing, where are we going to get the money? Or, gee, our budget, we're spending all this money on, repaving the parking lot. Do we really need a parking lot, or can we do something else? Articulating as a big question invites the leadership and the congregation and the membership into a much different discussion. Or our church has just received news of a significant bequest. How do we best use these funds? Because if you don't address that as a big question and you get a unexpected bequest of $250,000, then you're going to have brainstorming saying, now we can pave the parking lot or fix the roof or pay the sexton or whatever the brainstorming is. Articulating that challenge or opportunity as a big question invites the members of the community to look at that in a different way. Or, our town is facing massive depopulation. How will St. Mary's carry out its mission with fewer members and fewer potential members? There are situations, there are places in this country where growth is not a possibility because literally towns have been depopulated. There are places in the rural farm belt where these small farming communities are now big corporate farms where you no longer have the family farms, and there's no way that these towns are going to grow, and there's no way that people are going to travel 35, 40, 50 miles to come to church. by articulating that as a big question, it creates opportunities to look at this challenge in a different way rather than saying, oh my God, there's no way we can survive. So where do you go from that? And what do you do with big questions? First of all, it requires fresh thinking and a willingness to go beyond the usual suspects, the usual voices. Now, it may involve kind of that brainstorming, kind of problem-solving mode, but that gets you down the wrong path. And that's why we suggest you articulate it as a big question rather than a problem that needs solving. It also requires a willingness to acknowledge that we may just not have the answer right now. And this is going to take bringing in, more people. It may be bringing in some outside people to help you through this discernment process. It involves prayer. It involves humility. And it involves you going back to this strategy screen. So that when you have these challenges and opportunities and you address them as big questions, it creates a whole new way of looking at these that does not necessarily allow you or enable you to fall back on kind of the usual problem-solving, brainstorming, dead-end types of conversations that you may have been involved in the past. And it also avoids things like, well, we've never done it that way, or we tried it before and it didn't work, because the response is, yes, but we've never addressed it as a big question. We put it on the table as a problem that needed to be solved.
So the last, what we'd like to do for the last 15 minutes is just invite your questions, have a conversation. We have put up some, we have 8 actually, so there's 2 slides of this, but 8 potential next steps for you to consider, which ideally summarizes some of the concepts that we've been talking about. We, again, just offer these and tell us if you think this is a terrible idea and that if you completely disagree. I think the part of the point here is to have a conversation and start to, actually take some of these ideas and apply them to your particular context. And I'm going to try to do the phone, enable the phone again, and I think we'll see how it goes.
So that people's mics are activated.
What I would recommend is
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
What I would recommend is if you are on the phone and you're not speaking, to mute your phone. You're like literally press the button on your phone that's mute, and then if you want to speak on your phone, you can then unmute yourself. So that would help to keep the lines clear. So let's try this one more time and then we'll go from there. Great. So if someone would like to speak, I'm going to point out the little raise your hand button. someone would like to talk
Trent, you raised a good point. I think this process is critical in a clergy transition because that is, transitions are unique opportunities for organizations and individuals to address challenges and opportunities and to look at issues around change and transformation. And in this day and age, when congregations go out looking for new clergy leadership, I think more and more they have to really kind of grapple with these issues of discernment and who they are and what God is calling them to do. And for you clergy on the web conference, I'm sure when you look at profiles, you say, everyone says the same thing. We are a warm, welcoming community. We are actively involved in our neighborhood. We're looking for a pastor, a preacher, a teacher, someone who's going to inspire and empower us. We want to grow. That's all well and good. But I think if you as a congregation want to attract the kind of clergy leadership that's going to move you and help you navigate through these challenging times and form partnerships with lay leaders in revitalizing the congregations, you have to be much more precise and articulate about these issues of mission, big question, strategy. And also,
You have been muted. Your microphone has been turned on.
Donald, just 1 second. Hold on. Go ahead.
The congregation and a much broader conversation about where the community faith is and where it's going and what you're truly looking for in clergy leadership as you move forward into this brave new world. So I think this especially is good during transitions. And if you have a good interim, that interim is going to play a key role in partnering with the leadership of the congregation in engaging in this process. Pamela, what I would suggest, what we've been suggesting is that maybe at each vestry meeting, after you have prayer and Bible study, you have a strategic conversation for maybe 30 or 45 minutes, and you do it on a regular basis. And it could be, it doesn't have to be the big question, but it may be, how do we deal with the myriad of maintenance issues that seem to be getting away from us in a more focused, cost-effective way. I'm making that up. That may not be the question. But that's what you spend the bulk of your time on, engaging the leadership of the congregation in these strategic conversations. And then you spend the next 20 minutes or 45 minutes or whatever on, committee reports and budgets. But while people are fresh, while people are energized, after people have engaged in this kind of prayerful process, you tackle these issues. And it may be, okay, we're not here to solve problems. We're here to just engage in conversations and see what you all think about this. Vestry planning retreats, and I think vestry planning retreats and mutual ministry review cycles are critical, but what we're saying is an ongoing process. So that a vestry planning retreat may be a kind of a focused time where you set aside all your time to deal with these big issues. But unless you continue this process in an ongoing basis in your monthly meetings, people are going to fall back into their old habits. So the idea is this needs to be an ongoing, iterative process, much the way even our personal habits. We might have periods in our life cycle where we spend time on our health or our diet or our exercise, but it needs to be an ongoing process. Jeff, I have a leadership team of lay and clergy and lay who engage in strategic thinking each month, which I can take to the vestry. Yes. And the vestry, the vestry really it needs to play a critical role in this. You may have people outside of the vestry who are clearly kind of strategic thinkers, but they need to engage the vestry in this process, because ultimately the vestry needs to be, we believe, the missional, strategic body within the congregation. But if you have folks who are good at it and enjoy it and do it in an inclusive way, by all means, bring them into the conversation.
I just switched slides to show the second set of potential next steps. And one question that I have is for all the participants is, just to think about how, when someone comes with a great idea, what is the current process, implicit or explicit? What's the current way in which you decide, whether or not to go with that idea or not? And is this idea of kind of making that process a little bit more explicit, of setting up some filters, helpful?
Annie, that's a very good question. And strategic conversations do not mean that there's not implementation. And as I said early on, the problem with traditional strategic plans is that you have a planning period and an implementation period. I think there always has to be an action step, even if the action step is we'll have 2 or 3 people kind of tackle this issue and come back with recommendations at the next vestry meeting. So no, I'm an ENTJ in terms of my Myers-Briggs. Process is only there to lead to product. So I suggest that that there are always specific action steps, and people see the peg moving along the pegboard, because otherwise it leads to frustration. Good point, Annie, and thank you for raising that. I know there are a couple of the people who are typing, so we'll just wait for the questions. Yeah, Chris, that often a big question gets people out of a state of stuckedness, because I mean, and if you kind of frame it in the right way, or in your case, you might want to say, gee, I did this web conference, ECF. This is the idea of, might this be a possible big question? Not as a problem to be solved, but as a challenge or opportunity for which we devise strategies. And strategies are different than solutions. Strategies may lead to solutions, but strategies are kind of much more focused, much more dynamic, and engage people in much more creative processes. Yes, Eric Law, Sacred Acts, Holy Change, clearly embraces this kind of model.
I want to point out Kim Bach's suggestion about doing I want to point out Kim Bach's suggestion of discussing a big question at executive committee and then bringing it to the vestry, and that's, a big, I'm presuming that it includes strategic questions, and they've addressed many big questions that way. Great.
And it's a good way to see if it's going to be a dud or not. And it's okay if it's a dud. I mean, it's okay if you put a strategic question on your vestry agenda and no one has any kind of ideas or participate, and you can say, okay, think about it, pray on it. Let's talk about this the next time we gather. Part of it is, you have to change people's mindsets or approaches to this kind of business. But we here at ECF, our big question is important. And I'll tell you, our big question, at least the big question we're grappling with is, we provide all these kind of resources and tools for congregations, and we help people think about kind of new models, and we advocate for effective lay clergy partnerships. The issue is, how do we move more to this role of advocacy, and what does advocacy mean? And does advocacy mean that we sometimes offend people? How do we continue to provide support and resources and networking and best practices, but also advocate to bishops and commissions on ministry and vestries and standing committees that we have to look at new ways of being the body of Christ called the Episcopal Church. So, I mean, and we're not sure what that means yet. I mean, part of it is continuing to do what we're doing, but it may mean that whether it's our educational programs or some of our resources might have to have a little edge to them. So that is our big question that we're struggling with. So it is consistent with who we are as an organization, but it's stretching us to the next level. As I mentioned, we do have a program called Strategic Solutions, where we do help diocese congregations, other organizations, kind of be involved in this process in a very kind of provocative, practical, innovative, yet spiritually grounded way. And if we can be any helpful to you in any of these processes, please let us know.
Thank you very much for attending tonight's webinar. Again, as Donald said, if you have any questions, please let us, or want to be in touch about strategic solutions or any of the materials presented. We're going to be sending a recording out as well as the slides out to all people who registered. In just a little while, in your email, you'll be receiving a survey about this webinar, and we would really invite as much participation as possible for you to take a moment to fill that out. We read through each of our surveys and try to improve our webinars based on your feedback. So please do look for that in your email, and we will and fill it out. We really value your feedback.
Well, if you can get in touch with us, we would love to have a conversation with you. And first of all, we want to thank you all for being faithful in all your communities. Know that you are in our thoughts and our prayers, and we learn as much from you as you hopefully you learn from us. So we really thank you for your faithfulness. And it's always great to do these web conferences because it's wonderful to see 64 people from all over the country who are struggling with these issues in a very real context. So thank you all.